My son-in-law told me I had 48 hours to clear out my things. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I'd been sitting in the living room, my living room, though he didn't know that yet, still wearing the suit I'd put on for my daughter's funeral that morning. My tie was loosened. My good shoes were still on my feet because I hadn't had the energy to take them off. Annie stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, arms crossed, and told me that 48 hours was more than generous given the circumstances. I didn't say anything. I'd been keeping quiet about something for 22 years. A little longer wasn't going to hurt. My daughter's name was Caroline. She was 34 years old when the cancer took her, and she had her mother's laugh and my stubbornness and a way of making every room feel warmer just by walking into it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing how it felt to lose her, because I don't think I have the words. Some things don't fit inside sentences. You just carry them. What I can tell you is that she'd been sick for 14 months. We knew it was coming, even when we pretended we didn't. And in those 14 months, I drove her to treatments 3 times a week, sat with her in the infusion room, brought her soup she mostly didn't eat, and read to her on the nights the medication kept her awake. Her husband, his name is Jason, was present the way a piece of furniture is present. He was there. He occupied space. But he wasn't really there. I noticed. I didn't say anything. That was a habit of mine. Let me back up. Because the house matters to this story, and I want to get the details right. I'm a retired civil engineer, spent 31 years with the county, mostly managing infrastructure projects, bridges, drainage systems, the kind of work that nobody thinks about until something breaks. I wasn't wealthy, but I was careful. I saved. I invested modestly and consistently for decades, the way my father taught me, the way nobody seems to do anymore. When Caroline was 12, her mother, my wife, Patricia, was diagnosed with MS. It progressed slowly at first, then faster. We managed. Patricia was a remarkable woman. She adapted to every new limitation with a kind of grace I still don't fully understand. She passed 11 years ago, quietly on a Tuesday morning in March, and I held her hand until it went still. After she was gone, it was just Caroline and me for a few years. She was in her mid-20s, working as a graphic designer, living in an apartment across town. We had Sunday dinners together every week without fail. She'd come over, we'd cook something, we'd watch whatever game was on, and sometimes we'd just sit on the back porch and talk until it got too dark to see each other's faces. Those were good years. I didn't know they were the best ones I had left. Caroline met Jason at a work event. He was in sales, medical device sales, good income, commission heavy. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly and without much underneath it. He had good teeth and a firm handshake, and he laughed at the right moments, and Caroline thought he was wonderful, so I decided I would too. They got engaged after 18 months. They were looking for a house. This is where I need to explain something about the property. My parents had bought a house in Brentwood, a suburb outside Nashville, back in 1971. Nothing fancy, 3 bedrooms, a corner lot, mature oak trees in the backyard. My father had paid $38,000 for it, which felt like a fortune to him at the time. When my parents passed, the property came to me. I'd been renting it out for years. Steady income, good tenants. By the time Caroline got engaged, Nashville had become a different city than my father had known. The house was appraised at $540,000. Caroline and Jason couldn't afford that neighborhood on their own. Jason's income looked impressive on paper, but he spent the way people do when they haven't learned yet that income and wealth are different things. They had almost nothing saved. I had a choice to make. I decided to let them live in the house. I would remain the owner, the deed stayed in my name, always. I covered the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. All they had to do was pay the utilities and live their lives. I told Caroline privately. I told her not to make a big production of it, that I didn't want Jason to feel uncomfortable about the arrangement. Looking back, I understand now what that silence cost me. Jason knew the house was a family property. He knew it had been in my name, but years passed, Renovations happened. He and Caroline made it their own, and I think somewhere along the way, he simply stopped registering that it wasn't his. People do that. They occupy a space long enough, and the ownership becomes assumed, absorbed, taken for granted like air. Caroline knew the truth. She knew the whole time. She never told him. And when I asked her once, gently, whether she'd explain the arrangement to her husband, she looked at the floor and said, "Dad, it's just easier this way." I let it go. The 14 months of her illness were the longest of my life. I retired early. I had been consulting part-time, but I stopped entirely. And I was at their house more days than not. I'm the one who researched her oncology team. I'm the one who drove 3 hours round trip to Vanderbilt for her second opinion. I organized the medications, coordinated with the insurance company, filled a refrigerator when Jason didn't, fixed a porch railing that had been loose for 2 years because nobody had gotten around to it. Jason was not a monster. I want to be fair. He was not cruel to her. He went to some of the appointments. He cried at her diagnosis. But he had a way of being overwhelmed by difficulty that made him retreat rather than show up. And in the worst year of our lives, he retreated. He worked long hours. He went out with colleagues on evenings when I thought he should have been home. He was somewhere else, emotionally, long before Caroline was gone. She knew it. She didn't say so directly, but I knew she knew. Toward the end, when she was mostly sleeping, I sat beside her bed in the evenings, and we talked in the quiet way. You talk when there isn't much time left. One night, she reached for my hand and said, "Dad, don't let this make you bitter." I told her I'd try. "The house," she said, and then she fell asleep, and we never finished that conversation. I've thought about it almost every day since. She passed on a Thursday. Peacefully, at home, the way she'd wanted. By Saturday evening, Jason came to me. I was in the kitchen. I'd been trying to make myself eat something, standing over the sink with a bowl of soup I hadn't touched. He came in, poured himself a drink, bourbon, no ice, and leaned against the counter. He had the look of a man who had already decided something and was now waiting to deliver it. "I think we need to talk about the arrangement going forward," he said. I set down my spoon. "I've been thinking," he said, "and I think it's going to be easier for everyone if you start looking for your own place. I'm not trying to be harsh about it. You can take your time, but this house is going to be mine now, and I need space to figure out what my life looks like." I looked at him for a long moment. "This house is going to be yours," I repeated. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Well, Caroline's things are here. We built our life here. I'm not ready to just walk away from that. But having you around..." He paused, choosing the words. "It's not going to work long term, you understand." I understood a great many things in that moment. I understood that he'd had this conversation prepared. I understood that he believed what he was saying. I understood that his certainty about the house came from 7 years of living in it, of treating it as his own, of never once writing a check for the mortgage because there wasn't one to write. "Give me a little time," I said. He nodded, relieved. "Of course. A few weeks is fine." Then he topped off his drink and went back to the living room. I did not look for another place to live. What I did instead was call my attorney, a sharp woman named Helen who I've worked with for years on estate matters. I told her what had happened. She asked me a few questions. Then she told me what I already knew, but needed to hear out loud. The house was mine. The deed was in my name. It had never been transferred, and Jason had no legal claim to it whatsoever. "He can ask you to leave," she said. "He cannot make you." I told her about Caroline's estate and asked her to coordinate with the estate attorney. There were some things Caroline had arranged that I wasn't fully aware of until those conversations. She'd been more thoughtful than I'd realized, more deliberate. My daughter, even at the end, had been taking care of me. Here's what I did not do. I did not confront Jason. I did not wave the deed in his face. I did not call his family or his friends or post anything on the internet. I went about my days quietly, as I always have. He brought a woman to the house 3 weeks after the funeral. I was coming back from my morning walk when I saw our car in the driveway. I recognized it from the one time I'd driven past his office and seen them in the parking lot together. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone then. I didn't mention it now. I nodded at him when he passed me in the hall. He looked away. I made my breakfast, read the paper, went to the hardware store to buy weather stripping for the back door. It had been drafty for years. I'd been meaning to fix it. He asked me twice more, with increasing impatience, when I'd planned to be out. I told him I was still working on it. He huffed. He made comments under his breath. Once he told me that I was making things unnecessarily complicated, which I thought was an interesting choice of words from a man who had lived rent-free in someone else's house for 7 years. I still didn't say anything. I had learned from my daughter. She had said, "Don't let this make you bitter." I was trying very hard to honor that. The estate meeting was 6 weeks after the funeral. Helen had arranged everything with the estate attorney, a methodical man named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. What matters is that he was good at his job, and he had everything organized the way these things need to be organized. Jason came in wearing a jacket and tie, which surprised me. He had his own attorney with him, a young man who looked like he billed by confidence rather than by the hour. I came alone. I sat across the table and folded my hands and waited. Caroline's estate was not large. She had some savings, some personal property, her car. Those things went through the normal process without drama. Jason's attorney took notes. Then we got to the property. The residence at. The estate attorney began and read out the address. Jason leaned forward slightly. "Is not part of the estate," the attorney continued, "as it is and has been solely the property of Mr. Edwin Cole, held in his name continuously since 1998, when it was transferred to him following the passing of his parents. The decedent had no legal ownership interest in the property at any time." The room was very quiet. I watched Jason's face do something complicated. The color left at first, then his jaw moved, just slightly, like he was trying to find words, but the words weren't there yet. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. Jason didn't respond. He was looking at me. "I don't," he started. Then he stopped. She never said. "I know," I said. He stared at me. "You let me believe." "I let you live in my house for 7 years," I said quietly. "I paid the taxes and the insurance and the maintenance. I did not charge you rent. I did not ask for anything. That was my choice, because it was what Caroline wanted, and I loved my daughter." He looked at the table. "But the house is mine," I said. "It always has been." His attorney asked a few procedural questions. Helen answered them. There was nothing to argue. The documentation was 22 years old and completely in order. The deed was the deed. The title was the title. We were done in 40 minutes. Jason moved out in early February. He took what was his, which was less than he'd thought. The furniture that Caroline had chosen, many of the things they'd lived among for years. A fair number of them had been purchased with money I'd given Caroline over the years, money she'd used quietly, carefully, for the home she knew I owned. She had kept records. She had given those records to Helen 2 months before she died. That was the conversation she'd started and never finished. The night she fell asleep holding my hand. She had taken care of everything. I spent the better part of March repainting the bedroom. I took down some things that had been on the walls and replaced them with photographs. My parents in front of this house in 1973 petitioned me on our wedding day. Caroline, at 8 years old, standing under the oak tree in the backyard. She's squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera, and she looks exactly like her mother. I had the porch railing properly reinforced by a contractor. I planted a small garden along the south fence, mostly tomatoes and one climbing rose that Caroline had always wanted there. I fixed the drafty back door myself with the weather stripping I'd bought months earlier. The house is quiet now in the way that houses are quiet when they've finally been set right. I think about what Caroline said to me that last night. "Don't let this make you bitter." I think about it when I sit on the back porch in evenings with my coffee, watching the oak trees my father planted. I think she meant it about more than just Jason. I think she meant it about all of it. About grief, about loss, about the long years of watching someone you love diminish and not being able to stop it. I am not bitter. I am sad, the way I will probably always be sad. But there is a difference between grief and bitterness, and I am old enough now to know which one to hold and which one to put down. The house is mine. It always was. My parents bought it, and I inherited it, and I gave it to my daughter to live in, and now I live in it again with her photographs on the walls, and her rose beginning to climb the south fence, and the memory of her laugh in every room. That is enough. That is more than enough. People ask me sometimes why I didn't say something sooner, why I stood in that kitchen, still wearing my funeral suit, and let Jason tell me to clear out of my own house without so much as correcting him. The honest answer is that I'd spent a long time learning the difference between what you have the right to say and what actually needs to be said out loud. Some things don't require your voice. They just require your patience. Jason wasn't a villain in the way people imagine villains. He wasn't calculating. He genuinely believed what he was saying. That's almost the more troubling version of the story, that a man can live inside someone else's generosity for 7 years and slowly, without any malicious intent, mistake it for his own. He never asked whose name was on the deed because it never occurred to him to ask. And I think that says something worth sitting with. Not about Jason specifically, but about all of us. About how easy it is to accept comfort without ever examining where it came from or what it cost someone else. I'm not angry at him for that. I was, for a while. But anger is heavy, and I've reached an age where I'm more careful about what I choose to carry. What I keep coming back to is Caroline. The records she kept, the conversations she had with Helen in those last months, quietly, methodically, making sure everything was in order before she left. She didn't do that out of spite. She did it because she understood something that took me longer to fully appreciate. That love without structure is just a feeling, and feelings don't hold up in a conference room. She was smarter than both of us. She always was. The hard truth about the way I live my life is that I believe in consequences that arrive on their own schedule. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical way, but because the choices we make accumulate. Jason spent 7 years not paying attention to the finances of the house he lived in, to the woman he was married to the father-in-law who fixed the things that broke and filled the refrigerator and drove 3 hours round trip to a medical appointment while he was out with colleagues. Those weren't invisible acts. They were a record. And records eventually become evidence. He didn't lose the house because I punished him. He lost it because it was never his. That's a different thing entirely, and it matters. I think the hardest kind of integrity to maintain is the quiet kind, the kind where you know something the room doesn't know, and you wait, and you don't use it as a weapon, and you don't let it make you bitter. Caroline asked me not to be bitter. I think what she was really asking was that I stay myself. Steady, patient, precise. The same way I'd stayed myself through 31 years of engineering work, through Patricia's illness, through every hard thing that required me to show up and do the next right thing without an audience. That's what I try to hold on to. Not the outcome at the estate meeting, not the look on Jason's face when the attorney read the address aloud. What I try to hold on to is the rose climbing the south fence and the photographs on the wall, and the understanding that I did not need to become a different person to survive this. I just needed to keep being the one I already was. That's the whole lesson, as far as I can tell. Be the kind of person whose quiet life speaks for itself when the room finally goes still enough to hear it.